Chapter 2106. Beside the carriage, 3rd Xing and 15th Xing were leisurely swinging their whips as if they were just ordinary servants on a trip. "Third brother, this hat is too ugly. I don't want to wear it," 15th Xing said as he tugged at the tacky hat in his hand and looked bitterly at 3rd Xing. 3rd Xing glanced at 15th Xing from the corner of his eyes and continued to drive the carriage without saying anything. Can I not wear it?" 15th Xing asked 3rd Xing cautiously. "Yes." 3rd Xing turned around and answered. "Get out of the carriage and you don't have to wear it." Hearing 3rd Xing's indifferent words, 15th Xing immediately shut his mouth. He silently reached out his hand and put on his tacky hat. The luxurious carriage drove into a small town. The tree-lined path instantly turned into a bustling street. As soon as 15th Xing and 3rd Xing's carriage appeared, there were several inns in the town asking if they wanted to stay, saying that they had superior rooms in their houses. 15th Xing clicked his tongue when he saw this scene. "It's only been 3 years since I last went out. How did the outside change so much?" 15th Xing blinked his eyes curiously. In 15th Xing's impression, this small town used to be quite poor, but looking at it now, it was completely rich. There were also many new houses. Let's go to the rich restaurant." The expression on 3rd Xing's face did not change much. He said calmly, completely ignoring these restaurants. Then, he arrived in front of a very exquisite restaurant. There were 3 big words on the signboard above the restaurant. "Rich Come Restaurant." His heroic spirit soared to the clouds. 15th Xing raised his head and looked at the restaurant. The corner of his mouth twitched as he said, "Madam is really amazing. It's only been 3 years, and now she has opened restaurants all over the country." 15th Xing's words were filled with admiration. "Of course, there's nothing Madam can't do." 3rd Xing smiled faintly and said seriously, "3rd Xing, when did your mouth become so sweet?" Just as 3rd Xing finished speaking, he heard a faint voice coming from the carriage. The voice was so familiar. The person who lifted the curtain and stepped out was Xiao Chun. After Xiao Chun, the voice was naturally Jingyu. Xiao Chun was dressed in black as usual, but Jingyu was dressed in luxurious clothes. Her dark eyes slowly glanced at 3rd Xing as she let Xiao Chun hold her hand and stepped out of the carriage. "Master, Madam." 3rd Xing and 15th Xing bowed respectfully when they saw Xiao Chun and Jingyu step out of the carriage. Xiao Chun replied coldly, then turned his head to look at Jingyu. Jingyu looked around, and then the carriage stopped at the entrance of the rich restaurant. Jingyu and Xiao Chun stepped out of the carriage and saw countless people coming out of the restaurant. The red carpet was laid out at the feet of Jingyu and Xiao Chun. In the restaurant, the beautiful maids all stood on both sides of the red carpet. With a smile on their faces, they bowed and said, "Welcome, Master and Master." Jingyu, Xiao Chun, 3rd Xing, and 15th Xing were all stunned. Looking at this scene, they frowned in confusion. Chapter 2107. So what kind of situation was this? Jingyu blinked and then saw the manager of the restaurant. He was a huge fat man. With his short legs, he quickly rolled towards Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the others. Yes, he rolled over. Jingyu almost laughed out loud when she saw this scene. Look at the running fat man. His legs couldn't even be seen, and he looked like he was rolling over. He had only taken a few steps, and he was already panting. Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the others calmly crossed their arms and watched as the manager of the restaurant finally reached them. "Greetings, greetings, boss, old master." The fat man didn't even have time to catch his breath. Jingyu looked at the way the fat man panted and was afraid. Would he collapse before he could catch his breath? "You are the manager of this place?" Jingyu frowned deeply and asked the man in front of her. "Yes, I am Zhao Yibin, the manager of Peng City Restaurant." The fat man bowed respectfully to Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Average, Zhao Yibin. Jingyu was dumbfounded when she heard this name. Yes. When Zhao Yibin straightened his body, Jingyu's mouth twitched violently. She looked at Zhao Yibin and said, "You should be called Zhao Ichio. Qiu, lead the way." Xing Shiwu followed behind Jingyu. When he heard the conversation between Jingyu and Zhao Yibin, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. Zhao Yibin was stunned when he heard Jingyu's words. Then, under everyone's gaze, he exclaimed in surprise, "Zhao Ichio? Aya." The name boss came up with is simply too awesome. I like it. From now on, my name is Zhao Ichio, Zhao Yibin said happily. Jingyu looked at Zhao Yibin and was speechless. She silently added, "Damn it." Then, under the gazes of countless people, she stepped on the red carpet and walked into the restaurant. Jingyu inexplicably felt a very good feeling. It was really fun, but if there was no accident, their whereabouts would be exposed again. Jingyu sighed helplessly. Was this the tragedy of being a celebrity? Jingyu, Xiao Chun, and the rest entered the restaurant in a grandiose manner. The restaurant had already been tidied up. When Jingyu saw this series of arrangements, she immediately turned to Zhao Yibin with a conflicted expression and asked, "How did you get the news that I would be here today?" "Ha ha ha. It was Uncle Sean who sent the news." Zhao Yibin smiled and looked at Jingyu as he said softly. As expected, Jingyu heard this and helplessly lowered her eyes. Ever since Shun Yuqing found out that Jingyu was not dead, the way he treated Jingyu was completely different. He couldn't wait to move all the good things in front of Jingyu. Look at the situation now. Jingyu was about to leave for the Roman forest. She really had to hand it to him for the grand preparations along the way. The room was clean and tidy. Jingyu propped up her chin and looked around the room. She nodded in satisfaction. When she was sure that there was nothing else she needed, she chased Zhao Yibin away. Jingyu sat comfortably on a soft chair at the side and frowned slightly. "Why aren't the two children here yet?" Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun and asked worriedly. Chapter 2108. They should be there soon. Xiao Chun pursed his lips and replied, "It's all your fault. I told you to let the children come with us. Why didn't you listen?" Jingyu glared at Xiao Chun in disgust. Her eyes were filled with anger as she said, "If anything happens to my son, I won't let you off," Jingyu said threateningly. Xiao Chun frowned and said, "With Yin Jian and Yin Feng accompanying them, as well as Zhang Hua, I think. Ordinary people won't be able to get close to them." Oomph. When Jingyu heard Xiao Chen's words, she coldly snorted and slowly nodded. Thinking about it this way, it did seem to be the case. The two little guys that Jingyu and Xiao Chen were talking about were naturally Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian. When they left the prince's mansion, Jingyu was taken away by Xiao Chun. These two 4 or 5 years old children were dumped by Xiao Chun. He was seriously doubting whether they were really his biological children. Xiao Chun was already very unhappy looking at these two children. For the past 3 years, there were suddenly 2 stinky brats occupying Jingyu. Xiao Chun felt that his position was in danger. This time, he would not let these 2 children stay in the Roman forest. They have already grown up. Nothing will happen, Xiao Chun said with a stiff neck. As he spoke, he moved closer to Jingyu and hugged Jingyu with his hands. Jingyu was very angry at Xiao Chen's behavior. He was only 4 or 5 years old. How could he have grown up? On this side, Jingyu and Xiao Chun waited in the city. On the other side of the mountain forest, a carriage was slowly moving. From time to time, the sound of laughter could be heard from the carriage. On both sides of the carriage, 2 large gray wolves were walking slowly. Behind the gray wolves were 3 or 4 small wolves. "Sixth uncle, when can we see father and mother?" At this moment, the curtain of the carriage was lifted and a small head stretched out. On the small neck, there was a short snake tail that was curling up. The black snake tail retracted, and a raised snake head was revealed. The man who was driving the car stiffened when he saw the snake's red, forked tongue. "Eldest young master, there's still half a day before we can meet up with madam." The person who responded was the guard in charge of protecting the 2 young masters. Sixing thought that this was a good job. He spent a lot of effort to snatch this job from others, but he didn't expect that along the way, he would really experience what it meant to be worse than death. Look at the way they were escorting them. So many wolves, and the world-famous red burial flower. How could it be his turn to protect them? At most, he would be an errand boy and a coachman. There's still so much time. "Sixth uncle, you're driving too slowly." The person who spoke was Xiao Zine, nicknamed Little Potato. Six Xing wanted to cry, but had no tears. How was it that he was driving too slowly? Didn't you see the two gray wolves eyeing them covetously? It's already good that the horse that was pulling the carriage didn't kneel down. Besides, along the way, the two little brats had been playing this and that. Six Xing had been worried sick, and now he was even being despised. My brother and I are tired. We need to rest, Xiao Zine said in a serious tone. Sixth Xing frowned and said, It's getting late. If we don't speed up, we won't reach Peng City tonight. Chapter 2109. Can't make it. Xiao Zine suddenly widened his eyes in surprise. Then, the curtain of the carriage swayed and another head popped out. That expressionless face was like a miniature version of Xiao Chun. You mean we have to spend the night outside? The person who spoke was Xiao Zian, nicknamed Little Watermelon. That's exactly what this subordinate means. Every time he looked at Xiao Zian's face and looked at Xiao Zian's pair of green eyes, he couldn't help but be respectful. When he looked at this face, he thought of Xiao Chun. When he looked at these eyes, he thought of Jingyu. How could he not be respectful? Really? When Xiao Zine heard that he could spend the night outside, his eyes suddenly lit up with surprise. Those dark and bright eyes were so moving. Sixth Xing, who was watching from the side, suddenly felt his heart skip a beat. There was an ominous premonition in his heart. He frowned deeply and looked at Xiao Zine and Xiao Zian, then said, Two young masters, don't you want to see master and madam as soon as possible? Then let's go quickly. Sixth Xing said, No, I'm tired, I want to rest. Xiao Zine really wanted to see his mother, but when he thought of Xiao Chun, he suddenly became very unhappy. Anyway, he said that he was tired and wanted to rest. No matter what Six Xing said, he didn't give in. Six Xing wanted to cry, but had no tears. Looking at the two gray wolves blocking his path, he had no choice but to stop. If he didn't stop, what would he do if the two gray wolves rushed up and bit the poor horse to death? It wasn't easy to find a brave horse. If it died, Six Xing would sit on the ground and cry. Without a horse to pull the carriage, do you want these two gray wolves to pull the carriage? When Six Xing thought this, he suddenly trembled silently. He still wanted to live well and not do such a terrible thing. The two little guys successfully stopped the carriage. When Six Xing reached out to carry the two children down, Xiao Zine waved his hand and said, I'm the older brother. I don't want you to carry me. After Xiao Zine finished speaking, he climbed down the carriage with his short legs. Six Xing's hand stiffened and the corner of his mouth fiercely twitched. He wanted to reach out to hug Xiao Zian, but when he looked up, he saw Xiao Zian's cold face. Suddenly, he became even more embarrassed. Why did he have a feeling that if he dared to hug her, Xiao Zian would chop him? Woo-woo, this baby is so wronged. What kind of lousy job is this? Six Xing watched as the two little guys got off the ground. The four little gray wolves that followed Yin Jian and Yin Feng immediately gathered around Xiao Zine and Xiao Zian. Those wolf pups were simply too adorable. Of course, these four wolf pups were Yin Jian and Yin Feng's children. Yin Feng was a female wolf. Don't you know? When Jingyu found out that Yin Jian and Yin Feng actually gave birth to pups behind her, she deeply felt a sense of incomparable bitterness. However, she was also very happy. These wolf pups had now completely become Xiao Zian and Xiao Zine Shadow. Big Gray, Second Gray, Third Gray, Little Gray. Xiao Zine shouted domineeringly. The four wolf pups happily scurried to Xiao Zian and Xiao Zine's side. Yin Jian and Yin Feng whimpered and turned their heads away. Their pups actually had such a disgusting name. Chapter 2110. Yin Jian was very angry. Even though Yin Jian protested countless times to Jingyu, it was to no avail. So, the four big and little grays were born. Six Xing stood to the side and looked at the two children. They were very curious about the things on the side of the road and insisted on playing in the grass. Six Xing couldn't stop them at all. Such a big carriage couldn't block the road. Six Xing was about to drive the carriage to the side, but when he got on the carriage, he saw the carriage coming from not far away. The carriage was made of gold and was very exquisite. The The carriage was surrounded by guards. Six Xing looked at the carriage and suddenly widened his eyes. So dazzling. It's really made of gold. Who is this person? He's just here to show off his wealth. Six Xing was thinking, isn't this person afraid of being robbed by bandits? But looking at the guards around the carriage, it was obvious that they were rich and respectable. Which bandits would be so blind as to send themselves to be killed? Six Xing shook his head slightly and was about to move the horse carriage away. However, he did not expect that the two little fellows who were originally playing in the grass would turn their heads when they heard the movement of the horse carriage. When they saw the golden horse carriage, their eyes instantly lit up. Six Xing saw Xiao Xian's eyes and was suddenly alarmed. The corner of his mouth twitched fiercely. When he was about to speak, Xiao Xian turned his head and stared at Six Xing seriously and said, "Sixth uncle, I also want that shining carriage." Six Xing was instantly speechless. Xiao Xian really saw treasure. He pulled Six Xing's trousers with his short legs and said excitedly, "I want the glowing carriage. This, eldest young master." Six Xing was deeply conflicted and said, "When we see Madam, we'll ask Master and Madam to make it for you, okay?" Six Xing looked at Xiao Xian considerately and said, "I don't want it. I want it now." Xiao Xian didn't give up. Six Xing was so worried that his hair was about to fall out. Six Xing silently turned his head. Where is he supposed to get this for this little ancestor? Six Xing thought as he silently turned his head to look at the golden carriage that had stopped. In his heart, he was weighing whether or not he would be able to win if he were to snatch this ready-made carriage. Looking at these guards, En Feng and En Arrow should be able to handle them. While Six Xing was carefully thinking of a countermeasure, he didn't expect Xiao Xian to walk towards the golden carriage with a few gray wolves. The guards surrounding the carriage looked at the two children walking towards them, then looked at the four wolf pups beside the children and suddenly frowned. Where did this little kid come from? The leader of the guard shouted, "I've taken a fancy to your carriage. Quickly give it to me." Xiao Xian raised his chin and looked at the guard, who was much taller than him, and shouted, "Oh, you want my carriage?" The guard was so shocked by Xiao Xian's words that he didn't recover for a long time. So, these two kids came to rob him? The guard squatted down in amusement and looked at the jade-like child. His eyes were full of smiles. "Whose child are you? Why don't I see the master beside you?" The guard asked while squatting down. Chapter 2111. Why should I tell you? Xiao Xian unhappily turned his head away. "Oh, you have a bit of a temper." The guard's eyes were also tinged with a faint smile. Looking at the cute and adorable child, he slightly lowered his gaze and fell on the few little gray wolves beside Xiao Xian. "What are these?" The guard widened his eyes in surprise. They looked like puppies, but these guards were obviously not ordinary people. They could tell at a glance that these two children had wolf pups with them. It was really rare to see two children with wolf pups. Looking at these two children, they were definitely not from an ordinary family. Just as the guard was about to ask, Six Xing finally walked over. He helplessly looked at Xiao Xian and Xiao Xian and said, "Two young masters, we should go." "No. Sixth uncle, quickly buy this carriage for me." Xiao Xian refused to budge. He grabbed the corner of Six Xing's clothes and refused to leave. Six Xing ran away in tears. This is really interesting. This young master came out to play and encountered such an interesting robbery. Just as Six Xing was thinking about what to do, the glittering carriage curtain was lifted. A man wearing a flowery robe stepped out. The beautiful peony flower on her head instantly attracted Six Xing's attention. The man who stepped down and his attire made Xiao Xian and Xiao Xian freeze in place. They blinked their eyes and looked at the person who appeared. After fiercely twitching his mouth, Six Xing deeply frowned. This man, why does he look so familiar? Six Xing deeply frowned, as if thinking about something. Finally, he suddenly remembered that he seemed to have heard the boss mention a person with this attire before. "This is?" Six Xing politely greeted. The man wearing a flowery robe suddenly asked with a look of astonishment, "You actually don't know who I am? This young master is so handsome and elegant, and you actually don't know who I am?" Six Xing fiercely twitched his mouth. "Hey, Are you a guy or a girl? At this moment, Xiao Xin, who was blinking his eyes, suddenly asked. His question made Six Xing burst out laughing. The man in the flowery robe also widened his eyes when he heard this. Stinking brat, what did you say? The man's face was distorted. My mother said that only women wear flowery clothes. You not only wear flowery clothes, but you also wear a big red flower. Tell me, are you a woman? Xiao Xin seriously looked at the man and commented. He doesn't have breasts. Daddy said that those without breasts are men. Xiao Zian, who was standing at the side, also silently sized up the man and said very seriously. After Xiao Zian and Xiao Xin finished speaking, everyone fell into a short silence. If Xiao Zin's words made the man a little angry, then Xiao Zian's words made everyone feel as if they had been struck by lightning. What the hell is going on? Six Xing deeply sighed. For the first time, he began to doubt how his master educated his children. The man who was criticized was about to speak, but when he lowered his head and turned his head, he saw Xiao Zian standing next to Xiao Xin. Chapter 21:12. That pair of dark green eyes were shining with a very dazzling light. She had been blocked by Xiao Xin the whole time, so she didn't notice the little boy standing behind Xiao Xin. If Xiao Xin hadn't spoken, she really wouldn't have looked over. Aya! When the man saw Xiao Xian's eyes, he immediately cried out in surprise. Seeing this, Six Xing frowned slightly and hurriedly stepped forward to protect the two children behind him. We should go. Six Xing didn't want to waste too much time on the road, so he quickly said, Wait a minute, that child just now had different pupils. The man in flowery clothes exclaimed in surprise. Six Xing frowned when he heard that. Two huge gray wolves suddenly stepped out from behind Six Xing and stared at the group of people with covetous eyes. So what if it is? Six Xing looked at the man with a somewhat warning gaze. It really is different pupils. Let me see. After the man heard the answer, he immediately said in surprise. With an excited expression, he was about to step forward. However, just as he took a step forward, the two gray wolves beside him suddenly took a step forward. A wolf! The two gray wolves howled very fiercely, causing the man to immediately retreat in shock. Only then did his gaze fall on the two gray wolves. I know. You guys are Yin Jian and Yin Feng, right? The man in flowery clothes saw that Yin Jian and Yin Feng were here and immediately became even happier. He said very excitedly, Aren't you guys inseparable from Jingyu? Since you guys are here, then Jingyu must be here too, right? Jingyu, Xiao Chun, Ninth Master Xiao, Amuyu, Northern Pastoralist Mu Wangya. The man started shouting at the top of his lungs without saying anything else. Sixth Xing's mouth twitched fiercely when he saw the sudden change in attitude. He finally knew who this person was. So it was the Northern Pastoralist Mu Wangya. Sixth Xing naturally knew of Lord Mu's great name. So it's Lord Mu. Master and Madam aren't here. They went to Peng City first, Six Xing said quietly. Jingyu isn't here. Muyu was stunned when he heard this. He lowered his head in disappointment and said, I haven't seen Jingyu in a few years. I don't know if she's still as beautiful as before. What a pity. How did she become the 9th imperial concubine? Six Xing's face instantly darkened. Boss was right. This damn Mu Wangya was still coveting Madam. But these two little guys are Jingyu and Xiao Chen's children. She had grown so big. Let me see. Muyu looked at Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian excitedly. He squatted down and carefully looked at the two people. He really saw the shadow of Jingyu and Xiao Chun on the two people. Xiao Zian's pair of green eyes made Muyu sigh and say, They really are Jingyu's children. When I first saw this pair of strange eyes, I was scared to death. You know my mother and father? Xiao Xin blinked his eyes curiously. He looked at the person in front of him, who was neither a man nor a woman, and asked, Of course, I'm your father's best friend. I'm also very familiar with your mother. You can call me Uncle Mu. Muyu reached out and touched Xiao Xian's head and said kindly. Chapter 21:13. Aren't you Aunt Mu? Are you a man or a woman? Xiao Zin was confused. He looked at Muyu curiously. Man, I'm an uncle, not an aunt. Muyu instantly went crazy. If someone else dared to say this, Muyu would definitely kill him. But the person who said this was Xiao Chun and Jingyu's child. This was the child of the 9th emperors and the 9th imperial concubine. He really couldn't provoke him. Well, I'll reluctantly say that you're an uncle. Xiao Zin thought carefully and said, What do you mean by that? I'm an uncle. Muyu really wanted to cry. This was the first time that his gender was doubted. Who said that men can't wear flowery clothes? How did Jingyu teach him? Muyu felt a deep resentment, but he silently endured it. Uncle Mu, is this your carriage? After Xiao Zin confirmed Muyu's gender, he immediately looked at the carriage. He blinked his eyes innocently and said, Uncle Mu, my birthday is coming soon. You haven't given me a birthday gift yet. Why don't you give me this carriage? Muyu was surprised when he heard this. He curiously asked, Your birthday is coming soon. When will it be? Next year. Xiao Zin answered seriously. Muyu's mouth stiffened when he heard this. It's only May now. You're asking for a birthday gift until next year? On the side, Xing Lu lowered his eyes. He couldn't do anything to these two little masters. Muyu smiled faintly and said, You want to sit in my carriage? Do you want to look for your parents? Yes, Xiao Zin said with a smile. Uncle Mu, you're the best. Just give us the carriage. The two little guys acted cute together. The wolf pups also pulled Muyu's clothes. Muyu looked at the two little dolls and suddenly felt that her heart was going to melt. When she heard Xiao Zin's praise, she suddenly felt like she was floating in the air. Since you call me uncle, of course, I can give you this carriage, Muyu said with a smile. But I want to go with you to look for your parents, okay? Let your parents have a look. Uncle Mu gave you such a beautiful carriage. In the future, let your parents give you an even more beautiful one. Well, since you gave us a carriage, we'll reluctantly let you sit in it. Xiao Zin waved his hand and rushed towards the golden carriage without saying anything. The several wolf cubs also followed him inside. Wow, it's real gold. After Xiao Zin and Xiao Zin determined that the carriage was made of real gold, they completely refused to leave. They held onto the carriage and didn't want to let go. They rolled around inside the carriage. Since Flower Burial had been chased out, he had nowhere else to go, so he could only sit on the roof of the carriage and play. The wolf cubs followed their parents, Yin Jian and Yin Feng, and joined the large group. The soldiers didn't expect that the people they met on the road would be the children of the 9th emperors and the 9th imperial concubine. The golden carriage was incomparably flashy as it moved forward. Along the way, even the bandits had to retreat, looking at the two gray wolves that were escorting the carriage, then looking at the red burial flower that was entrenched on the roof of the carriage. Chapter 21:14. The guards standing on the side were all frightened. They were afraid that if they were unhappy, they would be eaten by the wolf snake. You two, who is the elder brother and who is the younger brother? Sitting in the carriage, Muyu asked happily. My name is Xiao Zin. I am the elder brother. Xiao Zin raised his small head and proudly replied. Looking at his appearance, it seemed like he wanted to act like he was the older brother. Oh, you are a little potato? Then you're a little watermelon? Muyu suddenly raised his eyebrows and turned to look at Xiao Zin. After Xiao Zin heard Muyu's words, her face suddenly turned ugly. My name is Xiao Zin. The way he said his name in such a serious manner was too similar to Xiao Chen's. Muyu was very happy and laughed. Looking at Xiao Zin, he inexplicably felt like he was looking at a miniature version of Xiao Chun. His eyes were full of smiles. Sitting in the carriage, he happily chatted with the two little guys. The carriage smoothly entered Peng City after the sky was completely dark. The city was brightly lit. When Muyu appeared in front of Jingyu and Xiao Chun with the two little guys, Jingyu was completely confused. Jingyu, long time no see. Muyu looked at Jingyu with burning eyes and greeted her. He automatically ignored Xiao Chun, who was standing on the side. Why are you here? Jingyu looked at Muyu and was speechless. She widened her eyes and asked, Why is my son with you? Mother. Xiao Zin happily rushed into Jingyu's arms. The way he rubbed against Jing Yu made Xiao Chun feel disgusted. He stretched out his hand and pulled Xiao Zin away. He looked at Xiao Zin seriously and said, "How did this king teach you?" "Father." Xiao Zin was pulled away by Xiao Chun. He suddenly lowered his head and silently complained in his heart, "Father is so bad." Mu Yu on the side laughed heartily and said, "This young master was traveling around. I didn't expect to meet these two little guys on the road to rob me. I know they are your children, so I brought them here." "Rob? Rob what?" Jing Yu's eyes widened as she asked in surprise. "That." Mu Yu turned around and pointed outside the restaurant. A shiny golden carriage stopped at the entrance. It was so dazzling that it almost blinded Jing Yu's eyes. Jing Yu looked at Mu Yu and her mouth twitched. Only Mu Yu would bring such a flashy carriage. Was he not afraid of being robbed? Oh no. Now, she had been robbed by her son. "Let's go inside and sit." Jing Yu listened to Xiao Zin excitedly say that the carriage was given by Uncle Mu. Then, along the way, Uncle Mu talked about some interesting things. She also learned that Uncle Mu almost became her father and so on. Jing Yu was still smiling when she heard the first part. But when she heard the last part, she suddenly felt the temperature of the surrounding air drop sharply. Jing Yu's facial muscles also stiffened. She turned her head and looked at Mu Yu, who was getting more and more frightened. Mu Yu didn't expect that Xiao Zin would say all the things he said. Listening to these words, Mu Yu felt a strong sense of hopelessness. That, Ninth Emperors, this is definitely a misunderstanding. I absolutely don't have the slightest intention of coveting the ninth imperial concubine, Mu Yu quickly explained. Chapter 21:15. However, the gloomy expression on Xiao Chen's face did not dissipate at all after he heard the explanation. "I really didn't. Even if I did in the past, I definitely don't have it now," Mu Yu said again. The corners of Xing San and Xing Lu's mouths twitched when they heard this. How could he explain it like that? In the past, wasn't the ninth imperial concubine not married to you yet? As the saying goes, everyone loves beauty. Jing Yu is so beautiful. Mu Yu said it so seriously that he did not notice that Xiao Chan was clenching his fist bit by bit. It felt like his wife was being peeped at. It was incomparably unpleasant. Xiao Chen looked up at Mu Yu and waved his hand indifferently. "Take him away." "Yes." Xing San and Xing Shiwu could not stand it anymore. After they received Xiao Chen's order, they immediately stepped forward and took Mu Yu away without saying anything. Hey, I haven't finished speaking yet. Where are you taking me?" After Mu Yu was taken away, Xiao Chun and Jing Yu suddenly felt that the world was peaceful again. Xiao Chen's expression gradually improved. "Dad, Mom, where's Uncle Mu going?" The two little guys who were eating happily on the soft couch asked curiously. "Oh, your Uncle Mu is sick. Sixth uncle is taking him to see a doctor." Jing Yu smiled at Xiao Zin and Xiao Zian. Uncle Mu said something wrong and Dad got angry, so he was taken away. Xiao Zian swallowed the food in her mouth silently and said seriously. Jing Yu's mouth twitched when she heard Xiao Zian's words. "Hey." Xiao Zian was stunned when he heard these two answers. Cough, cough. "Let's eat." Jing Yu decisively chose to shut her mouth and reached out to pick up food for the two children. Xiao Zian was a complete replica of Xiao Chun. It was fine if she didn't speak, but when she did, it was like a lightning bolt. Jing Yu felt an incomparable sense of worry. The two little guys wanted to sleep with Jing Yu and Xiao Chun, but the possessive Xiao Chun threw them into another room. Then, he closed the door and went to sleep with Jing Yu in his arms. I don't have to give away my wife. That's great. Jing Yu was completely speechless at Xiao Chen's actions, but her protests were completely ineffective. Fortunately, the two little guys were very well behaved and didn't make any noise. The two little guys were sleeping soundly on one side. Early in the morning, Jing Yu and Xiao Chun were still sleeping when they heard the sound of the door opening. Then, two little figures climbed into Jing Yu and Xiao Chen's bed. "Daddy, Mommy." The two little guys didn't say anything and crawled into Jing Yu and Xiao Chen's quilt. Xiao Chen had to let go of Jing Yu. Looking at the two little guys crawling into the quilt, he slightly frowned. Jingyu looked like she was still half asleep. Why are you up so early? Jingyu patted Xiao Xian's head and planted a kiss on Xiao Xian's white and tender cheek. Then, she looked at the two little guys and asked. After being kissed by Jingyu, Xiao Xian was immediately satisfied and crawled into Jingyu's arms. Xiao Chun frowned and reached out to pull Xiao Xian out. Before Xiao Xian could feel his mother's soft body, he was caught by Xiao Chen's big hand. Suddenly, he lowered his head and looked up at Xiao Chun. The father and son looked at each other, and sparks flew everywhere. Chapter 21:16. When Jingyu saw this scene, her eyes were full of smiles. She helplessly said, "What are you guys doing?" Xiao Chun and Xiao Xian silently looked at each other and continued to look at each other without saying a word. In the end, Xiao Xian seemed like she didn't want to look anymore. She yawned and closed her eyes. Then, she buried her head in Xiao Chen's arms. Although Xiao Chun had a look of disgust, he still reached out and covered himself with the quilt. "Did you sleep well last night?" Jingyu calmly asked as she pinched Xiao Xian's little face. "Not good. The bed here is too hard." Xiao Xian's face was full of disgust as he unhappily said, "The bed here is not as soft as the one in the carriage that Uncle Mu gave me." "Oh!" Jingyu suddenly chuckled. Muyu really knew how to enjoy life. The family of four rolled around on the bed for a long time. After talking for a while, Jingyu and Xiao Chun helped the two little guys get dressed. While Muyu was anxiously waiting for him, he finally arrived. "You guys are finally up. This young master's teapot is almost empty." Muyu looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun with hidden bitterness and said, "Isn't it better to drink until you're full?" Jingyu rolled her eyes indifferently. She watched as Xiao Chun carried the two children to a chair. Then, she slowly sat down and looked at Muyu and asked, "Why did you come here instead of staying in the northern pastoral? Only you guys are allowed to go sightseeing, but I'm not allowed to go out?" Muyu said with disgust, "Looking at you guys getting married and having children, this young master is still alone. This time, I came out to bring a beauty back to get married." "Eh?" Jingyu frowned and asked curiously, "I remember. Aren't your wives and concubines in the Mu Palace?" "Nonsense." When Muyu heard Jingyu's words, he suddenly jumped up and angrily said, "Those women were forced on me by others. I have no other intentions towards them. The one I'm looking for must be a woman that I love deeply." Jingyu looked at Muyu's serious appearance, and the corner of her mouth slightly twitched. Looking at Muyu's appearance, Jingyu was really worried about Muyu's trip. But this guy actually found a Tokyo in the northern pastoral. "I see that you guys are going to the Roman forest?" Muyu changed the topic and asked as he looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chun. "That's right." Jingyu nodded slowly and said, "Now that there's nothing to do, I want to go to the Roman forest to play. Maybe I'll stay in the forest for a long time. Yin Jian and Yin Feng's children can take advantage of this opportunity to raise them well." TSK, TSK, TSK. Muyu was speechless when he heard Jingyu's words. Only Jingyu would bring her children to the forest, and only Xiao Chun would allow Jingyu to do as she pleased. However, there didn't seem to be any harm in the forest. Thinking about how Jingyu came out of the forest and was already so powerful, these two children definitely wouldn't be too bad. Just as Jingyu and Muyu were talking, Third Xing suddenly rushed in. His strange expression immediately attracted the attention of Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun looked at Third Xing and asked, "What happened?" Chapter 21:17. "Master, we just received news from the Crown Prince of the Imperial City." Third Xing said quietly, "The Crown Prince has written a memorial to remove the 9th Emperors from his position and take over the Imperial residence. The Emperor has decreed him to be Prince Qingping. In addition, the Crown Prince has broken up the entire Xing alliance and rebuilt it. We have been abandoned." Third Xing was on the verge of tears when he said this. He had only come out with his master once, yet he had been abandoned? He didn't even have an organization anymore. "What did you just say?" "The Crown Prince has written a memorial to remove the 9th Emperors from his position." Muyu was shocked when he heard this. He looked at Third Xing and Xiao Chun in horror. The son had removed the father from his position. Most importantly, the emperor had agreed and even decreed him to be Prince Qingping. Muyu felt as if his worldview had been refreshed. He looked at Xiao Chun, wanted to see Xiao Chen's expression. Unfortunately, Xiao Chen's face was completely calm. He didn't have any other emotions. Brother Crown Prince has become Prince Qingping. Is he a very powerful official? Xiao Xin, who was on the side, asked excitedly. Yes, your brother Crown Prince is now an official with a higher rank than father. Jingyu's eyes were full of smiles. Her gloating expression made Xiao Chun unhappy. He cursed in his heart. This traitorous brat. Madam, there's one more thing. Third Xing calmed himself down and said, the Crown Prince has bought all the businesses under Madam's name. He's using Madam's son's name. Now, all of Madam's businesses are under the Crown Prince's name. The novel that Madam wanted to publish has also been taken over by the Crown Prince. In other words, Madam has nothing now. After Third Xing said this, Jingyu felt as if she had been struck by lightning. What did you say? Jingyu almost jumped up. Those businesses were all Jingyu's assets. It would be fine if they were gone, but the novel was copied and printed. It was the story of Jingyu and Xiao Chun. Jingyu had asked someone to write it for nearly a year. It was currently selling like hotcakes. She didn't expect it to be taken away by Xiao Bai in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Jingyu's heart was filled with a huge fuck. Third Xing's words of having nothing immediately provoked Jingyu. What did Xiao Bai say? When Xiao Qin heard that Jingyu's property was also taken away, he immediately felt much better. Others might not know, but Xiao Qin knew that that money was Jingyu's life. Xiao Bai's torment had definitely taken away half of Jingyu's life. The Crown Prince said that inheriting his father's position would allow him to do things better. With enough money, he would be able to walk more smoothly in the official circles. The Crown Prince also said that Master and Madam don't have to go back. The Prince's mansion has been demolished and rebuilt. There's no place for Master and Madam to stay. After Third Xing said this, Muyu was completely dumbfounded. He turned to look at Jingyu and Xiao Chun, who were equally dumbfounded. He couldn't help but laugh out loud. Ha ha, you guys will have such a day too. Ha ha, you've been tricked by your own son. Ha ha ha. Muyu's wild laughter successfully made Jingyu and Xiao Chun turn around. Chapter 21:18. Are you laughing? Jingyu gritted her teeth as she stared at Muyu. Haha, I really can't help it. Look at you. The ninth emperors and the imperial concubine with different pupils were actually tricked by their own sons. Now, not only are they penniless, they can't even go home. Haha. Jingyu listened to Muyu's words. She suddenly felt the muscles on her face twitching fiercely. She took a deep breath and said, "Drag him away." Muyu was dragged away while laughing wildly. Jingyu confirmed with Third Xing again and again, and finally found out that Xiao Bai really didn't leave any leeway. He was telling Jingyu and Xiao Chun not to go back to the Tokyo. Xiao Bai has really grown up. Jingyu sat at the table and said with a sigh, "That's good." Xiao Chun leaned back slightly and said calmly, "With Xiao Bai in the Tokyo, it seems like there's nothing for us to do. You can rest assured now, right? I still feel uncomfortable. When I first found him on the island, he didn't know anything." Jingyu let out a deep sigh. There was a faint nostalgia in her eyes. Unknowingly, so many years had already passed. That little child from back then had now grown into an adult. I've already said that Xiao Bai is very suitable. Xiao Chun reached out and held Jingyu's hand and said calmly. Jingyu smiled helplessly, but she also felt relieved. After Jingyu and Xiao Chun packed up, they prepared to leave. The carriage that the two little brats stole from Muyu, there was no reason for them to return it. In addition, Jingyu and Xiao Chun were poor. The carriage had to be left behind, so Muyu was robbed. Jingyu and Xiao Chun took the two children and left. On the way to the Roman forest, Jingyu slightly lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the distant city behind her. There was a faint sadness in her eyes, but when she felt Xiao Xin snuggling into her arms, his cute appearance made Jingyu's mouth blossom with a smile again. Isn't this what Jingyu has always wanted? To be able to leave the hustle and bustle of the city, Jing Yu had too many concerns. Now, Xiaobai directly cut off Jing Yu's escape route, and also told Jing Yu and Xiao Chun that they can do what they want to do without worry. How could Jing Yu not understand Xiaobai's meaning? Everything seemed to be the same in the Roman forest. However, the outer perimeter of the forest had been baptized by the flames of war. Even after such a long time, one could still see some traces of it. When Jing Yu entered the forest, she immediately sold off the golden horse carriage and exchanged it for a lot of silver notes. Only then did he feel a little more confident. Nothing changed in the depths of the forest, but the grass and leaves became more lush. Jing Yu stood under the tree and reached out her hand to touch the trunk of the big tree. The corner of her mouth revealed a faint smile. The joy that came from inside made Jing Yu feel comfortable. "Father, is this the place where Mother used to live? Why is there no house?" Xiao Xin looked at the lush trees and the small body sitting on the silver arrow. He looked around with some doubts. "Because Mother's waiting for Little Potato to build the house." Jing Yu turned her head and looked at Xiao Xin with a smile and said, "Let's build the house on the tree, okay?" Chapter 2119. Wow, a house on a tree. Good. Xiao Xin suddenly jumped up and down in excitement. Xiao Xian's face was also filled with excitement. Jing Yu and Xiao Chun looked at the happy faces of Xiao Xin and Xiao Xian, and their eyes were filled with smiles. Within the Roman forest, it seemed that with the arrival of Jing Yu and Xiao Chun, it became noisy. In the depths of the forest, pleasant laughter could often be heard. Jing Yu said that it was not fun to wear a sparrow. Jing Yu really built a house on a tree. Jing Yu liked the big tree very much. On the tree trunk, there were several houses built. These were the residences of Jing Yu and Xiao Chun. 3rd Xing, 6th Xing, and the others were all chased away by Xiao Chun and Jing Yu. Of course, they were only chased away after the houses were built. There were 3 small houses. Jing Yu and Xiao Chen's house was on the largest tree trunk. Xiao Xin and Xiao Xian's house was next to each other, but they were separated. These 2 little guys seriously said that they wanted to live separately. Jing Yu and Xiao Chun were naturally happy to see this. The forest was silent. As the gray wolves leaped, time seemed to pass little by little. Throughout the year, there was always the person you loved by your side. Everything seemed so perfect. On a long slope, Jing Yu wore a very simple dress. She walked up step by step with light steps. When she looked up, she could see 3 pine trees standing proudly on the top of the mountain. "Where?" A call came from behind. "Mother, wait for us." Jing Yu's footsteps paused. When she turned around, she saw 2 gray wolves rushing up. After circling around Jing Yu, they quickly ran to the top of the mountain. Xiao Chun, dressed in black, walked towards Jing Yu unhurriedly. Xiao Xin and Xiao Xian also trotted towards Jing Yu with their short legs. "Slow down." Jing Yu looked helplessly at the 2 children who were covered in dirt from playing. The tenderness in her eyes could not disappear. Xiao Chen came forward and held Jing Yu's hand. Then, the 2 of them walked towards the top of the hill. The 2 children were followed by 4 wolf pups. They ran happily to the top of the mountain. On the top of the mountain, there were 3 tombstones. The names on the tombstones were Jing Yu's parents, Jing Yu and his wife, Qi Yun. The last one was the tomb of the she-wolf who saved Jing Yu. There were no weeds on the 3 tombstones. It could be seen that Jing Yu and Xiao Chun often came here to take care of the tombstones. Jing Yu took Xiao Chun and the 2 children and respectfully bowed in front of the tombstones. Then she sat down under a pine tree and looked up at the sky and trees in the distance. The corners of her mouth curved slightly. The she-wolf likes to look from here. Now that she has her parents with her, she won't be lonely. Jing Yu slightly lowered her eyes and looked up at Xiao Chun. She said, "Do you blame me for dragging you to live in the deep mountains? What nonsense are you talking about?" Xiao Chun frowned in dissatisfaction. He hugged Jing Yu and said deeply, "With you by my side for the rest of my life, even if I have to live in hell, I will still be very happy." "Fool!" When Jing Yu heard Xiao Chen's words, she suddenly smiled. Her eyes were filled with deep affection. She looked at the mountain forest in the distance, and suddenly felt a little absent-minded. When did she and Xiaochen meet? Chapter 21-20. Daddy, Mommy, did you meet each other here? How did you meet each other? Xiao Xin was tired from playing with the wolf pups. He happily got into the arms of Jingyu and Xiao Chun and asked curiously while blinking his eyes. Us. When Jingyu heard Xiao Xin's question, she was slightly stunned. Then, she absent-mindedly said, That was a long time ago. At that time, your mommy was only 14 years old. Jingyu's gaze was very distant. She looked at the mountains in the distance and thought of the first time she met Xiao Chun. She took Yin Jin out to hunt, but she didn't expect to meet Xiao Chun. Originally, she thought it was just a fleeting moment, but she didn't expect to get herself into big trouble. When they first met, they were hunted down in the whole city. Then, she felt embarrassed when she fell into Xiao Chen's bath. Finally, he protected her again and again in the imperial city. Jingyu never knew that a person could penetrate into her life little by little. From then on, it was unforgettable. At first, it didn't matter. Later, Xiao Chun protected her again and again. He fought against the emperor and the imperial concubines. It was as if he always tolerated her. Xiao Chun, when did you fall in love with me? Jingyu seemed to be in a trance as she asked. When I first met you, it was probably deep in my bones. Xiao Chen's answer was deep and distant. That kind of amazement didn't come from the eyes, but from the heart. Jingyu suddenly smiled. Since they met in the imperial city, when she looked for her father and learned the truth, she hesitated and hesitated. How'd she fall in love with him in the end? She thought more than once that she didn't belong to this world. How could she be worthy of love? Later, she thought about why she didn't look at the present and only thought about the future. Now, Jingyu only rejoiced in her heart. Fortunately, the man she accepted was so outstanding. Since they were in love, twists and turns and quarrels were inevitable. Now that she thought about it, she felt that everything she had experienced back then was actually so wonderful. When Tokyo was discovered, this man continued to protect her without hesitation. He did not care about his reputation and protected her wholeheartedly. He allowed her to do whatever she wanted. Even though Tokyo was the city he had protected wholeheartedly, he did not hesitate to abandon it. Because that person was her. Jingyu was so lucky to have Xiao Chun by her side. Mother, is this love? Xiao Xin and Xiao Zian listened to Jingyu's long-winded story. It was as if they had heard it many times, but no matter how many times they listened to it, it was still vivid and moving. Yes, it's love. Jingyu reached out and stroked the heads of the two little guys. Does father love mother? Xiao Xin turned to look at Xiao Chun and asked. Love. Xiao Chun turned to look at Jingyu and said, Deep love without regrets. Then, does mother love father? When Xiao Xin heard Xiao Chen's answer, he immediately nodded with satisfaction. Once again, he turned his gaze to Jingyu. Xiao Chun also looked at Jingyu, waiting for her answer. This, Jingyu frowned and said, This question, I need to think about it carefully. Jingyu. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu and suddenly gnashed his teeth. Jingyu exclaimed and quickly ran away. She laughed and said, If you catch me, I will tell you the answer. Ha ha. Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu, who ran away and helplessly lowered his head. In the end, he unconsciously smiled, stood up, and chased after Jingyu. The two little guys shouted for their father to chase after them, and then shouted for their mother to run away. Amidst the laughter and the sound of the wind, Jingyu quietly looked at Xiao Chun with her pair of golden-green eyes. She said she loved him very much. End of story. Chapter 21-21. The Tokyo had grown stronger, and the northern pastoral had maintained its status quo. Nothing seemed to have changed, but was there really no change behind this tranquility? No one knew. Perhaps Xiao Yuling knew, but didn't do anything about it. Xiao Yuling had once said that the world was only interesting when one competed with others. Now, in Xiao Yuling's opinion, it was meaningless, right? The world was still the world. Even after experiencing the destruction of a country, it didn't change the original state of the world. Everything in the northern pastoral was very quiet. After Hellion Theo became the emperor of the Northern Pastoral, the status quo had always been maintained. In the Northern Pastoral Imperial Palace, Hellion Theo sat on a wide dragon throne. He raised his hand and rubbed his forehead tiredly. "Your Majesty, it's getting late. You should rest early." The head eunuch standing by the side looked at Hellion Theo and said with a frown, "Okay." Hellion Theo raised his head. On his handsome face, there was a stubble on his chin. His originally beautiful face seemed to have a lot more charm. His fox-like eyes still carried an invisible charm. Hellion Theo slowly stood up and said, "I heard that the 9th Empress and the 9th Imperial Concubine of the Tokyo Imperial City have left the Tokyo Imperial City. Crown Prince Xiao Bai has been conferred the title of Prince Qingping." Hellion Theo asked casually as he walked towards the sleeping quarters. "Yes, the 9th Empress is no longer in charge of the Prince Qingping residence," the head eunuch said respectfully. "You do have some ability." Hellion Theo smiled faintly. He turned his gaze away and didn't say anything else. Looking at the buildings and roads in the Northern Pastoral Imperial Palace, he suddenly felt a heavy fatigue. "There's no need to come in and serve me." Hellion Xiao turned his head and spoke very indifferently as he stepped into his bedchamber. That eunuch bowed in acknowledgement and watched as Hellion Xiao walked into his bedchamber. However, the words that were at the tip of his tongue didn't leave his mouth. The emperor had been back for so many years. There were countless beauties in the harem, but the emperor had never summoned any of them. The position of the empress had always been empty. In the past, the head eunuch would ask about it from time to time, but there was no result. Now that he saw the emperor's appearance, he was incomparably anxious. The head eunuch let out a long sigh, if there was something wrong with the emperor or not. Of course, Hellion Xiao didn't know that the head eunuch by his side actually held this kind of thought. Presumably, if he knew, he'd definitely chop this damned eunuch in a matter of minutes. He actually suspected that there was a problem with his own ability. Inside the sleeping quarters, Hellion Theo reached out to undo his outer robe. Just as he was about to take it off, his arms suddenly stiffened. A cold expression flashed across his face. He slowly turned around and saw the tall figure standing under the beaded curtain enter Hellion Theo's line of sight. "You?" Hellion Theo's eyes widened little by little. He looked at the familiar figure walking over with heavy footsteps. The expression on his face cracked a little. He called out in astonishment, "Phone Maching, it's me." Phone Maching was wearing a dark purple robe. He was tall, and his black hair was casually tied up. Chapter 21-22. Phone Maching looked at Hellion Theo with a deep and serene gaze. The stillness in his eyes caused Hellion Theo's heart to skip a beat. "What are you doing here?" Hellion Theo turned his head away uncomfortably and said, "What are you doing here? This is the Northern Pastoral Palace. If you're caught, even 10 heads won't be enough for you to be beheaded." Hellion Theo silently took a deep breath and suppressed the uncontrollable emotions in his heart. After so many years, she originally thought that those feelings would settle down little by little with time. However, she didn't expect that those feelings that she thought had settled down would collapse the moment this person appeared. "With you around, would you be willing to let me die?" Phone Maching looked at Hellion Theo's expression and suddenly smiled. The corners of his mouth curled into a faint smile. The gaze he looked at Hellion Theo with was scorching and deep, causing Hellion Theo's heart to tremble violently. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Hellion Theo forced himself to calm down and clenched his fists slightly. "It's been 5 years, Hellion Theo." Phone Maching walked towards Hellion Theo step by step and said, "I've traveled thousands of miles and seen the fickleness of the world. I've restrained myself from rushing back to look for you countless times. However, all of these, the moment I heard the slightest bit of news about you, I came without hesitation. I came here today to ask you only one question." Phone Maching stood in front of Hellion Theo. The two of them were only a step apart. Phone Maching quietly looked at Hellion Theo and said, "Tell me, in these 5 years, you haven't doted on a single concubine, haven't touched a single person, and why is the position of the Empress empty? You? How could you? After hearing Foam Maching's words, Hellion Theo's eyes suddenly widened. Then, as if he had thought of something, he gritted his teeth and said, "You asked the people from the Constellation Palace to investigate me." And that's right. Foam Maching shrugged casually and said, "I did investigate you. How could Su Yu and Xingyi agree to such a rude request?" Hellion Theo was so angry that the roots of his teeth itched. After saying this, he suddenly froze and abruptly raised his head to look at Foam Maching. Looking at Foam Maching's calm and serious gaze, he suddenly had a bad premonition. "Oh, I'm just speaking the truth." Foam Maching's lips curled into a faint smile. Hellion Theo's face stiffened for a moment, then looked at Foam Maching coldly and said, "You bastard. What did I do?" Foam Maching said very innocently, "I just asked Su Yu about the Northern Pastoral Emperor. She said that Jing you wanted to know. Can I say that?" Foam Maching slightly curved his eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's it." Hellion Theo was stunned when he heard Foam Maching's words. "If it's not that, do you want me to say something else?" Foam Maching silently took another step forward. Hellion Theo hurriedly retreated, and a trace of embarrassment appeared on his face. He glared at Foam Maching and said, "I'm just afraid that you'll say something you shouldn't say." "Oh, what should I say that I shouldn't say? Why don't you tell me?" Foam Maching approached step by step, and Hellion Theo retreated somewhat pathetically. In the end, when he was almost forced onto the dragon bed, Hellion Theo shouted, "Enough! This is the Northern Pastoral, not your territory." Hellion Theo took a deep breath and said, Chapter 21-23. "Oh!" Foam Maching suddenly stopped in his tracks. With his hands behind his back, he looked at Hellion Theo and said, "You still haven't answered my question. Why didn't you choose an empress? Why didn't you enter the harem?" "That's my business. What does it have to do with you?" Hellion Theo turned his head away stiffly. "If you don't leave, I'll call for help." Foam Maching looked at Hellion Theo's nervous expression and smiled faintly. He said calmly, "Hellion Theo, I'll make you admit it sooner or later." After Foam Maching finished speaking, he turned around and left. After Hellion Shio saw that Foam Maching had left, he slowly heaved a sigh of relief. Unknowingly, he was actually so nervous. The beating of his heart in his chest was so clear. Hellion Shio did not know why, but when he looked at the empty palace, he felt a strong sense of loss. This feeling made Hellion Shio very uncomfortable. After taking a deep breath, he suppressed the churning thoughts in his heart. The next morning, "Did your majesty not rest well last night? Do you want this servant to cancel the morning court session?" The head eunuch asked worriedly when he saw the dark circles under Hellion Theo's eyes. After so many years, this was the first time he saw the emperor like this. "We're fine. Let's go." Hellion Theo frowned slightly and raised his hand to rub his eyebrows. This was the first time in many years that he couldn't sleep because of someone. Hellion Theo was a little irritated. He kept thinking about Foam Maching, who appeared last night, and what Foam Maching said. By the end of the day, almost everyone felt that Hellion Shio was absent-minded. The head eunuch also broke out in a cold sweat for Hellion Shio. Fortunately, there were no major problems. At night, Hellion Shio dragged his tired body back to his own bedroom. "Did you miss me so much that you lost your appetite? Absent-minded?" Just as Hellion Theo entered the inner chamber, he heard a familiar voice. It made Hellion Theo's body freeze again. "Why is it you again?" Hellion Theo frowned and said unhappily, "You didn't sleep last night? You're also absent-minded today. It seems like you really miss me." Foam Maching moved closer to Hellion Theo to take a look. He was so close that Hellion Theo was shocked. Just as he was about to dodge, Foam Maching straightened his body. "Seeing that you missed me so much, I naturally came as you wished." Foam Maching looked at Hellion Shio with a smile and said. Hellion Shio looked at Foam Maching's expression and frowned, feeling very conflicted. He opened his mouth and said, "My palace's defense is so weak? Even a second-rate expert like you couldn't stop him? Second-rate? Feng Maching's face darkened. He looked at Hellion Theo with displeasure and asked, "In your eyes, I'm just a second-rate? Am I wrong?" Hellion Theo smiled faintly and said, "Can you beat Xiao Chun?" Feng Maching suddenly fell silent. A feeling of displeasure rose in his heart. So he was being looked down upon. However, Hellion Theo's words seemed to make sense. He really couldn't beat Xiao Chun. Although it was the truth, why did Feng Maching feel so uncomfortable when it came from Hellion Theo's mouth? Chapter 21-24. Feng Maching was silent. "It's good that I can beat you. What does Xiao Chen have to do with me?" Feng Maching said quietly. The meaning behind his words made Hellion Theo's heart skip a beat. His heartbeat instantly accelerated. "I have nothing to do with you." Hellion Theo turned around and said, "I want to take a bath. Leave quickly." "What a coincidence. I also want to take a bath. Why don't we do it together?" Feng Maching said with a smile as he looked at Hellion Theo. "You damned lecher. Get lost." Hellion Theo's beautiful face flushed red. His flustered and exasperated voice sounded. Hellion Theo probably forgot to control his volume and alerted the people outside the hall. Immediately, they heard the questioning voice from outside the hall. Hellion Theo was startled, but he quickly stabilized himself and said, "I'm fine. There's no need to come in." Feng Maching stood to the side and looked at Hellion Theo's appearance. His pitch-black eyes unconsciously softened and a faint smile appeared on his face. Looking at Hellion Theo's every move seemed to be pleasing to the eye. "Why are you still standing there? Leave quickly. Are you waiting for someone to catch you?" Hellion Theo turned around and saw that Feng Maching was still standing at the same spot. He was instantly furious and shouted anxiously. After hearing Hellion Theo's words, Feng Maching smiled calmly. "I'll come and find you tomorrow." Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and said before turning around and leaving, "Who wants you to come?" Hellion Xiao spoke with a look of disdain, but the faint smile at the corners of his mouth could not be concealed no matter what. For many days in a row, Feng Maching came every night. Hellion Theo chased Feng Maching away again and again, but he couldn't stop Feng Maching at all. Hellion Theo was also helpless. Until recently, Feng Maching, who came every day, suddenly stopped coming. After not seeing Feng Maching for 3 days in a row, Hellion Theo, who didn't care at first, suddenly felt uneasy. "Your Majesty, it's time to eat." This was the umpteenth time the head eunuch had said this to Hellion Theo. It was already late when Hellion Theo sat on the dragon throne, but Hellion Theo didn't seem to have any intention of eating. "No need. Let's leave. I'm not hungry." Hellion Theo waved his hand in annoyance. What he was thinking was, did Feng Maching just appear randomly and disappear again? At the thought of this, Hellion Theo felt suffocated. He put down the memorial in his hand in annoyance, stood up, and walked in the back garden. He looked at the dark night sky and unconsciously clenched his fists. His brows were tightly knitted, as if they had never relaxed. The head eunuch who followed Hellion Xiao looked at Hellion Xiao's appearance and also frowned. A few days ago, the emperor seemed to be in a good mood. Why did he become like this these few days? "Your Majesty, is there something you are worried about?" the head eunuch asked cautiously. Hellion Theo was silent for a moment. He looked into the distance and asked absent-mindedly, "Do you know what it feels like to like someone?" When Hellion Xiao asked this question, the head eunuch was immediately dumbfounded. He furrowed his brows slightly in silence, as if he was considering how to answer. He furrowed his brows slightly and said, "This servant has entered the palace since I was young. What is the feeling of liking someone? This servant truly does not know." Chapter 21-25. This servant is just a eunuch. I don't have the right to like anyone. After the chief eunuch spoke, he suddenly thought of something. He looked at Hellion Theo in surprise and asked, "Your Majesty, do you have someone you like?" "No." Hellion Xiao was questioned by the head eunuch. His heart suddenly jumped fiercely, as if he was trying to hide something. He quickly said a sentence, then turned around and walked away, saying, "Let's go." Back to the palace. It was hard for the chief eunuch not to be suspicious when he saw Hellion Theo's reaction. He looked at Hellion Theo in horror and watched as Hellion Theo entered the palace. His eyes widened as if he had thought of something. Why did His Majesty's words sound like he was begging for something but couldn't get it? The chief eunuch immediately thought of the time when Hellion Theo said that he wanted to marry Jingyu, when the 9th imperial concubine wasn't the 9th imperial concubine, and when His Majesty was still a prince, didn't he? Could it be that His Majesty is still thinking about the 9th imperial concubine? So after so many years, he was still thinking about the 9th imperial concubine and didn't even go to the harem? The more the chief eunuch thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. His eyes were filled with worry. If Jingyu wasn't the 9th imperial concubine, it would be easy to handle. However, Jingyu was the 9th imperial concubine and was even the mother of 2 children. This, he didn't even want to think about it. At this moment, the head eunuch's heart was broken. If Hellion Shio knew that his casual question had actually caused this person's imagination to run wild like this, he would definitely control his own mouth next time. Hellion Shio very calmly stepped into his own bedroom. When he stepped into the palace today, he sensed a different smell. There was a faint smell of blood. Hellion Theo's expression instantly changed. When he turned around and entered the inner room, he immediately saw the man lying on the ground. His body was covered in blood, and there was incense burning in the room. The smell was very strong, and the pale face on the ground was none other than Foam Watching. Damn it! Hellion Theo's heart almost jumped out when he saw this scene. He quickly went forward to help Foam Watching sit up and check the wound on Foam Watching's body. Fortunately, the wound wasn't deep, but there was a lot of blood. At first glance, it was obvious that the wound had not been bandaged for a long time. "Are you crazy?" Hellion Theo's eyes were full of anger as he said, "You could have bandaged yourself, so why didn't you? Waiting for death?" Cough, cough. Foam Watching narrowed his eyes weakly, looked at Hellion Theo, and said, "If I bandaged myself, how could I play the trick of injuring myself in front of you? You." Hellion Theo took a deep breath and didn't say anything else. He helped Foam Watching sit down on a chair at the side and quickly rummaged through the cabinets to find something like an emergency bandage. Foam Watching panted slightly and glanced at the wounds on his body. He reached out and took off his clothes with difficulty. The exposed upper body had a rather deep wound on the left side of his chest. Other than this wound, one could also see that Foam Watching had many scars on his body. If this wound was a little deeper, you would have gone to see the King of Hell. Hellion Theo looked at Foam Watching's wound with a slightly cold expression. "This young master is lucky. How can I bear to see the King of Hell before I marry you?" Foam Watching looked at Hellion Theo, who was applying medicine for him, and a faint smile appeared in his eyes as he said calmly. Chapter 21-26. Hellion Theo's face instantly turned cold when he heard that. He reached out and pressed down hard. "Hiss, be gentle," Foam Watching hurriedly said. His face turned even paler. Looking at Hellion Theo's embarrassed and angry look, he didn't know why, but he actually felt that it was so cute. Looking at Hellion Theo's serious look of bandaging the wound, he slightly arched his eyebrows. "Who did it?" Hellion Theo asked after bandaging the wound. "Who doesn't have an enemy in the pugilistic world?" Foam Watching said casually. He reached out and put on his clothes before saying, "I was just careless and got ambushed. Don't worry, I will settle this score sooner or later." Hellion Theo glanced at Foam Watching when he heard that. After a moment of silence, he frowned and asked, "What have you been doing for so many days?" When Foam Watching heard Hellion Theo's question, he turned his head to look at Hellion Theo in surprise and asked, "Are you concerned about me? I just want to know when you will die next time." Hellion Theo smiled coldly. These words made Foam Watching feel very amused. Looking at Hellion Theo's obviously concerned expression, but he just didn't admit it. It was really funny. "Didn't I just say that I didn't marry?" Foam Watching was about to speak, when Hellion Theo glanced at him coldly. Feng Maching immediately changed the topic and said very calmly, "How can I die without marrying a wife?" Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching's shameless expression. He was so angry that the roots of his teeth itched, but there was nothing he could do. Feng Maching was seriously injured, so he naturally stayed in Hellion Theo's bedroom. Hellion Theo almost never left the bedroom. Even if he went out, he ordered that no one was allowed to enter. Food and other things were sent in. The servants outside could clearly feel that their emperor's appetite had increased. After half a month, Feng Maching's injuries were almost healed. Hellion Theo helped Feng Maching change his dressing as usual. Looking at the wounds that were almost healed, he nodded in satisfaction. "It's almost healed. You can leave now." Hellion Theo didn't hesitate to chase him away. "Ouch! It hurts. It's not healed yet." Feng Maching said nothing and lay down again. Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching's face. He had never seen such a thick-skinned person. Just when Hellion Theo was about to speak, he heard the chief eunuch's voice came from outside. Your Majesty, concubine sent someone to bring some snacks." Hellion Theo frowned when he heard that. Just as he was about to refuse, Feng Maching stopped him and said happily, "I'm hungry. Bring it in. If you don't want to eat, I'll eat it." Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching's matter-of-fact expression and was so angry that he didn't recover for a long time. However, when he turned around, he asked the servant to put the food down. After the servant left, Hellion Theo brought the soup in and placed it beside Feng Maching. TSK. You're really lucky." Feng Maching looked at the soup and stared at Hellion Theo with a strange expression. He narrowed his eyes and said, "So many women are throwing themselves at you, but you're indifferent. Why?" "It has nothing to do with you." Hellion Theo turned around with a cold expression when he heard that. Feng Maching stood up with a dark expression and frowned when he saw Hellion Theo's back facing him. Chapter 21-27. Hellion Theo, admit it. You're the same as me. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo quietly and said, "You're no longer interested in women. Shut up." Hellion Theo abruptly turned his head and glared at Feng Maching angrily. "Get out of here right now." Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's flustered and exasperated look. For some reason, he suddenly smiled happily. He looked at Hellion Theo quietly and said, "What are you afraid of? Why? It's not that you refuse to accept me and accept yourself." Hellion Theo panted heavily and didn't say anything. He clenched his fists tightly by his side. Feng Maching didn't drink the soup and left just like that. He left as suddenly as he had arrived. They hadn't seen each other for a month. Hellion Theo's birthday came, and the whole country was celebrating. There were banquets and singing and dancing. The young women at the banquet were trying their best to please Hellion Theo. However, Hellion Xiao turned a blind eye to it. That cold and detached appearance of his had broken the hearts of countless women. "Are you tired, Your Majesty?" A soft voice drifted over. Hellion Xiao slightly paused his hand that was drinking wine. He turned his head to look and saw a beautiful woman dressed in decent clothes looking at him with a face full of concern. "I'm fine. Concubine Jing, come with me to the back garden." Hellion Theo stood up and said. Concubine Jing seemed to be surprised when she heard this. Then, a look of surprise appeared in her eyes. She quickly stood up and complied. Some of the concubines below saw this scene and were immediately envious. The emperor treated everyone the same, but concubine Jing was different. She was always by the emperor's side. Seeing the two of them walk away hand in hand, the officials burst into tears. The emperor was finally enlightened. Northern Pastoral had an heir. Concubine Jing stayed by Hellion Theo's side. Time hadn't left much of a mark on Hellion Theo. She was still as beautiful as ever. Her long and narrow eyes were even more charming. Hellion Theo sighed deeply and strolled in the garden without saying a word. Hellion Theo didn't say anything, so concubine Jing naturally didn't dare to say anything. She just quietly stayed by Hellion Theo's side. "How long have you been in the palace?" Helian Theo suddenly asked as he walked. Replying to your majesty, Qinxia has been in the palace for 7 years. Concubine Jing bowed in response. Her tone sounded calm, but the resentment in her voice was still there. Helian Theo turned around and looked at concubine Jing. Her pretty face made him feel comfortable. Serve me in Longxiang Palace tonight, Helian Theo said before he turned around and left. Concubine Jing was left standing there in shock. Her heart raced uncontrollably at that very moment. 7 years. Concubine Jing had thought that she had no chance at all. The cold treatment she had received over the past 7 years was enough to dishearten anyone. However, she didn't expect the emperor to change so much during these days. The day that concubine Jing had been waiting for had finally come. When the head eunuch heard the news, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. He hurriedly called for people to come and change the bedding in the palace. He even lit incense. After Helian Xiao returned from the study room, he saw the changes in the room. Immediately, he frowned, feeling extremely conflicted. Muda, did you do this? Helian Theo called out with a cold face. Chapter 21-28. Your servant specially prepared it for your majesty. Muda was the head eunuch's name. When he heard Helian Theo calling out to him, he immediately chuckled and came up to him. Helian Theo's face instantly darkened when he saw how eager Muda was to take credit. Are you tired of living? Helian Theo said coldly as he looked at Muda. Please spare me, your majesty. Concubine Jing is already waiting for your majesty's favor in the inner room, Muda quickly said when he saw that his attempt at flattery had failed. Scram. Helian Theo spat out a single word and walked in with cold steps. Helian Theo suddenly felt very strange when he smelled the ambiguous fragrance in the room and looked at the meticulously prepared gauze canopy. He stopped at the side of the bed and couldn't go forward no matter what. Your Majesty? A soft voice called out to him. It was obvious that concubine Jing had just finished bathing. She was wearing a light gauze, and her faintly discernible skin was extremely seductive. Any man who saw her would have thoughts about her. However, Helian Xiao was unmoved. What are you thinking, your majesty? Do I look good? Concubine Jing took a deep breath when she saw Helian Theo standing there unmoving. Then, she boldly walked up to Helian Theo and reached out to hook her arms around Helian Theo's neck. Concubine Jing had some confidence in her looks and figure. She didn't believe that the emperor wouldn't be moved by her seductive appearance. Helian Theo looked at concubine Jing quietly and tried to convince himself over and over again. Just as he was about to reach out and hug her, he saw a black shadow flash before his eyes. Then, concubine Jing, who had her arms around his neck, was knocked unconscious. Phone watching, are you crazy? Helian Xiao's eyes were filled with astonishment as he looked at Phone watching, who had barged in, and then looked at the person who had been knocked unconscious by Phone watching without hesitation. The astonishment in his eyes could not be concealed. I am crazy. Phone watching's face was filled with anger as he said, if the people from the Constellation Palace didn't inform me, were you planning to make this woman your empress tonight? Constellation Palace. Helian Theo was stunned. Why would the Constellation Palace even inquire about such matters? Yes. Phone watching kicked concubine Jing away with a look of disdain. He stared at Helian Theo coldly and said, everyone knows about my feelings for you. Only you turn a blind eye. Phone watching. You. When Helian Theo heard Phone watching's words, he was so shocked that he was completely speechless. His face was full of panic. I was too foolish to allow you to slowly accept me. Now, it seems that this won't work. After saying that, Phone watching glanced coldly at concubine Jing, who was lying on the ground. His eyes were filled with disgust. Jin Sheng, throw this woman somewhere else. You know what to do. As soon as Phone watching finished speaking, another person appeared from the darkness. Helian Theo's eyebrows twitched as he watched from the side. He suddenly realized how bad the security in his palace was. It wasn't enough for Phone watching to come in alone. He even brought in a subordinate. Yes, Jin Sheng responded respectfully. He reached out to grab the unconscious concubine Jing and ran out of the window. Then, only Feng Maching and Hellion Theo were left in the room. Now it's time for us to settle the score. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo calmly and said, Chapter 21-29. What are you trying to do? Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching, who was approaching him, and immediately retreated with vigilance. He frowned slightly. First, tell me what you did when I wasn't around for a month. Feng Maching wasn't in a hurry. He just looked at Hellion Theo quietly and asked in a very calm tone. It sounded like a greeting between good friends. However, there was a strange tone in his words. Why did he sound like he was questioning him? Do I need to report to you what I did? Hellion Theo pursed his lips and stared at Feng Maching. Didn't you leave? What are you doing here? Leave. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and said, Are you chasing me away? You chased me away once 5 years ago. Now you want to chase me away again? Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo and frowned deeply. He stepped closer to Hellion Theo and asked, Do you hate me so much? If that's the case, then kill me. Feng Maching. Hellion Theo looked at the dagger Feng Maching took out, and his expression changed. Why can't you bear to? Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo's nervous expression and smiled faintly. You. Hellion Theo looked at Feng Maching and was speechless for a long time. Feng Maching wasn't in a hurry. He just stood there and looked at Hellion Theo quietly. Where did your men take concubine Jing? Hellion Theo took a deep breath and asked. Killed her. Feng Maching's face turned cold when he heard Hellion Theo's question. He turned his head and said. Hellion Theo stared at Feng Maching. Feng Maching was a lunatic, so it was really possible for him to do such a thing. Hellion Theo didn't say anything and just stared at Feng Maching. If you're so concerned about a concubine, why don't you ask me where I've been for the past month? Feng Maching felt deeply hurt and glared at Hellion Theo. What does that have to do with me? Hellion Theo snorted and turned his head away. Hellion Theo, tell me why you won't accept me. Feng Maching looked at Hellion Theo quietly. Looking at the side of Hellion Theo's face, Feng Maching had initially thought that Hellion Theo hated him. However, over the past 5 years, he had seen it clearly. Hellion Theo didn't hate him. What he said back then was just to drive him away. Hearing Feng Maching's serious question, Hellion Xiu's heart trembled slightly, but he stood there silently without saying a word. His heart was thumping, as if there were countless words he wanted to say, but he couldn't say a single word. Feng Maching, leave. Never come back. Hellion Theo was silent for a long time before he finally lowered his eyes and said, You know that I can't do it. Feng Maching answered firmly. I'm a man. I like women. Do you understand? Hellion Xiu abruptly turned his head and glared at Feng Maching fiercely. Do you think I'll believe you? Feng Maching smiled disdainfully and said, That woman seduced you just now, but you didn't feel anything. Now you're telling me that you like a woman. Don't you think it's ridiculous? When Hellion Theo heard Feng Maching's words, it was as if he had been poked in a sore spot. His expression instantly turned ugly. All right, since you said that you like a woman, why don't we prove it? Chapter 21-30. Feng Maching suddenly smiled and calmly looked at Hellion Xiu as he spoke. Hellion Theo was stunned when he heard that. He looked up at Hellion Theo and asked with a frown, What do you mean by that? That's exactly what I mean. Feng Maching said with a heavy gaze. He stepped forward and caught Hellion Theo off guard. He reached out to grab Hellion Theo's head and kissed him without saying a word. When those slightly cold, thin lips pressed down, Hellion Xiu's eyes suddenly widened. This kind of familiar touch, that scorching tongue that wandered around his own lips, caused Hellion Xiu's mind to instantly go blank. Feng Maching, you lunatic! Get out! Get out! After Hellion Xiu came back to his senses, he reached out and pushed Feng Maching away. Feng Maching was still immersed in the kiss and was pushed to the bed before he could react. Oh, so you're so wild. Feng Maching was stunned for a moment. Then, he looked at himself, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of his eyes. He lay on the bed and said, I'm ready. Come, you. Hellion Theo was so angry that he didn't want to stay here any longer. He flicked his sleeves and turned around. Foam Watching looked at Hellion Theo's departing figure. His eyes darkened bit by bit. There was an unconcealable pain on his handsome face. He wasn't as relaxed as he was when he faced Hellion Theo. When concubine Jing woke up, she saw her own palace. She didn't feel uncomfortable at all. In other words, what she expected to happen last night didn't happen at all. Dongji, when did I come back? Concubine Jing rubbed her head and asked in a daze. Your Highness, His Majesty personally sent you back this morning. Dongji's face was full of excitement. Looking at her Nyang, she was very moved and said, His Majesty is so good to Nyang. Nyang should have a good rest. Oh, concubine Jing's heart skipped a beat when she heard that. It was obvious that the emperor hadn't touched her, so why was he acting like this? Concubine Jing had no idea what was going on at all. She was ordered to serve the emperor in bed for the next few days, and she was sent home by the emperor himself every morning. Everyone said that concubine Jing was the only one who was favored by the emperor, and that favor was bestowed upon her as well. She was made a noble consort and was in charge of the imperial harem. But only she knew that the emperor did not touch her at all. On the same night, Hellion Xiao stepped into the bathing pool with exhaustion all over his body. The tiredness on the tip of his brows was difficult to conceal. Hellion Xiao silently narrowed his eyes and looked at the mist above the pool. There was not the slightest emotion in his eyes. Footsteps sounded beside his ear, and they sounded very gentle. Your Majesty, this concubine is here to help your Majesty bathe. The person who came was naturally the newly promoted noble consort, Xiaqing. Hellion Theo narrowed his eyes and didn't refuse. He let Xiaqing come over and reached out to help Hellion Theo wipe his back. Looking at the side of Hellion Theo's face, even a woman would be jealous of such a handsome face. Xiaqing's eyes were slightly silent. Her small hands were teasing him intentionally or unintentionally, causing Hellion Xiao's eyes to twitch slightly. When he wanted to avoid it out of reflex, he seemed to have thought of something. His body did not move, and he allowed Xiaqing to do what she wanted. Your Majesty. Xiaqing leaned against Hellion Theo and called out in a very delicate voice. Hellion Theo's hands, which were hidden in the water, clenched slightly. Chapter 21:31. The scorching wine slid down Hellion Theo's throat. His eyes became even more confused. It was as if he couldn't remember anything at this moment. But why was the figure in his mind so clear? Hellion Xiao was somewhat angry as he fiercely swung his hand and fiercely smashed the wine jar in his hand onto the ground. Your Majesty, when Hellion Theo flung the wine jar away, Muda was so shocked that he hurriedly knelt down. Hellion Theo roared in annoyance. Scram! All of you scram! Muda's eyes were filled with worry. He had no idea what was going on with Hellion Theo. Looking at the wine on the ground, he didn't dare to say a word. If he angered the emperor, even if he had a few heads, it wouldn't be enough for him to chop off. He hurriedly waved his hand and dismissed everyone in the hall. In this incomparably spacious hall, Hellion Theo took a step forward and sat on the stone steps. He raised his head and looked at the hall. In an instant, he felt the pain in his heart magnifying infinitely. He didn't feel the slightest bit numb. Who was it that said to drown his sorrows in wine? His sorrows were even more sorrowful. Hellion Xiao suddenly smiled and closed his eyes slightly. When he reached out his hand to take the wine jar at the side, his hand touched nothing but air. Drinking wine is harmful to the body. A familiar voice sounded. Hellion Xiao's body suddenly froze. He slowly turned his head to look and saw Foam Watching standing beside him with a wine jar in his hand. Foam Watching was wearing a dark purple robe. Hellion Theo slowly lowered his hand. He lowered his head and didn't look at Foam Watching. Don't be in such a hurry to chase me away. Foam Watching quietly looked at Hellion Theo and said, I'm here to bid you farewell. You. Hellion Theo raised his head and looked at Foam Watching. Then, as if he felt that his action was too big, he turned his head away unnaturally and said, If you want to leave, just leave. Why are you talking to me? After Hellion Theo said this, he did not hear a reply for a long time. Hellion Theo almost thought that Foam Watching had left. He quickly turned his head, but when he turned his head, he met Foam Watching's burning eyes. I'm sorry, Foam Watching suddenly said as he looked at Hellion Theo. Hellion Theo's heart skipped a beat, but he remained silent. In the future, I won't appear in front of you again. You're right. I'm a man. In the future, I'll manage Sunluo Tower well, get married, and have children for the rest of my life. Foam Watching smiled lightly. I'm very sorry for this period of time, Foam Watching said as he bowed slightly to Hellion Theo. You? Hellion Shou looked at Foam Watching's expression and listened to Foam Watching's words. These words were what he had been looking forward to hearing, but now that he really heard them, he didn't feel the slightest bit of joy. He could even clearly feel the pain coming from his heart. That kind of pain was so clear that Hellion Theo's heart instantly clenched. Today, I'm here to bid you farewell. Northern Pastoral is your painstaking effort. I understand. When Foam Watching said this, he smiled very calmly. He reached out and put the wine jar in his hand aside and said, Tokyo has never let down his guard. I think you're the same. I'll help you. After Foam Watching said this, he turned around and was about to leave. Stop. Hellion Theo was silent for a long time. Finally, when he saw Foam Watching turn around and leave, he suddenly raised his head and shouted. Hellion Theo stood up shakily and looked at Foam Watching, whose back was facing him. Chapter 2132. What do you mean by what you said just now? Hellion Theo asked as he stared at Foam Watching. His eyes were full of mockery. You think you can come and go as you please? Do you really think this is Sunluo Tower? Hellion Theo approached Foam Watching step by step. Looking at Foam Watching's tall figure with his back facing him, Hellion Theo felt very uncomfortable. Isn't this what you've always wanted? Foam Watching didn't turn around. With his back facing Hellion Theo, he said, Don't worry, I won't come to this Northern Pastoral again. Foam Watching, you bastard. When Hellion Theo heard Foam Watching's words, it was as if he had heard something extremely infuriating. He raised his hand, pulled Foam Watching over, and punched Foam Watching's face without hesitation. Why do you have to say whatever you want? Hellion Theo looked at Foam Watching's collapsed appearance and suddenly felt very comfortable. Foam Watching fell to the ground in a somewhat sorry state. He reached out to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth and looked up at Hellion Theo. Hellion Theo's drunkenness had probably kicked in. His body, which was pouncing towards Foam Watching, was a little unstable. Foam Watching reflexively supported Hellion Theo. When he saw Hellion Theo raise his fist again, he raised his hand and grabbed Hellion Theo's wrist. Foam Watching's eyes were very calm. Once is enough. Foam Watching looked at Hellion Theo. At this moment, Hellion Theo was pressing down on Foam Watching, and the two of them were lying on the ground. Let go. Hellion Theo was grabbed by Foam Watching. He frowned and shouted, This time, you pounced on me yourself. Why should I let go? Foam Watching looked at Hellion Theo with a faint smile in his eyes. When he looked at Hellion Theo, his eyes were filled with tenderness. This gaze made Hellion Theo's heart skip a beat. You? Hellion Theo was about to forcefully break free from Foam Watching's hand, but Foam Watching turned over and suppressed him. The two of them suddenly flipped over. In this spacious palace, the two of them were lying on the soft carpet. No matter how one looked at it, this scene was extremely ambiguous. Hellion Theo's eyes were filled with astonishment. He didn't know why the situation had turned out this way in the blink of an eye. He felt dizzy and completely lost the ability to think. Hellion Theo looked at Foam Watching and reached out to grab his collar. Didn't you want to know the answer? Hellion Theo stared at Hellion Theo. His narrowed eyes and smiled as if he wanted to say something. In an instant, Foam Watching held his breath, afraid that he would interrupt Hellion Theo. However, just as Foam Watching's body stiffened as he waited, he saw Hellion Shou slowly release his hand. Then, that pair of beautiful eyes slowly closed. His head tilted to the side, and he actually fell asleep just like that. Even if you want to know, I won't tell you. These were the words that Hellion Theo muttered. Hellion Theo. You. Phone Maching looked at Hellion Theo lying down and heard Hellion Theo's last words. Suddenly, he felt extremely helpless. He had a belly full of anger, but there was nowhere to vent it. Looking at Hellion Theo, sleeping so comfortably, Phone Maching felt a deep sense of helplessness. He got up and bent down to carry Hellion Theo to the bed. Looking at Hellion Theo's incomparably beautiful face, the expression in his eyes was so complicated. What should I do? Phone Maching's words were so helpless. Chapter 21:33. When Hellion Shio woke up, the first thing he saw was a familiar curtain and Phone Maching. Why are you on my bed? Hellion Theo's brain crashed for a moment. He rubbed his aching head and looked at Phone Maching, who was looking at him with his head propped up. His eyes were filled with astonishment. Oh, have you forgotten? Phone Maching was wearing a simple inner garment. His black hair was scattered as he looked at Hellion Theo calmly and said, Last night, you cried and screamed for me not to leave. You even pulled me onto your bed. Don't you remember? Phone Maching, get out of my sight. Hellion Shio's exasperated roar ferociously kicked Phone Maching off the dragon bed. He looked very angry, but his handsome face and even his ears were red. On this morning, all the ministers felt that it was very strange because their emperor's mind had started to wander. Moreover, the tips of his ears had been very red. That absent-minded look made Muda break out in cold sweat. Your Majesty, are you all right? Do you want the imperial physician to take a look? After the morning court session, Muda looked at Hellion Theo worriedly and asked. I'm fine, Hellion Theo said with a cold face. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. At this moment, a guard suddenly rushed over and said, There's a man holding Your Majesty's token. He claims to be Your Majesty's friend and is waiting outside the hall. The guard said as he presented the jade pendant in his hand. When Hellion Theo saw the jade pendant, his face immediately turned green. Hellion Shio was still wearing the jade pendant yesterday. However, after a night, it had actually fallen into the hands of someone else. It was obvious who the guard was talking about. Please come in. Even if Hellion Shio did not want to meet him, Phone Maching had come to his door openly, so Hellion Shio naturally had to meet him. When he saw Phone Maching, who was wearing a purple robe, walking in, Hellion Shio was stunned. Hellion Shio once again thought of what happened this morning. Immediately, the redness on the tip of his ears, which had disappeared with great difficulty, surfaced once again. Long time no see, Phone Maching's aura attracted the attention of everyone in the hall. Some of them looked at Phone Maching and Hellion Theo curiously. All of you leave. Hellion Theo took a deep breath and waved his hand to dismiss everyone. When only Hellion Theo and Phone Maching were left in the room, Hellion Theo stood up from his seat and glared at Phone Maching angrily. What are you doing here? Isn't it enough for you to sneak in? You actually came in the open? Hellion Shio was obviously quite angry. In order to see you openly, could it be that you prefer me to come secretly? Phone Maching narrowed his eyes and looked at Hellion Theo teasingly. The meaning in his eyes seemed to be implying something. Hellion Theo instantly blushed. Didn't you say yesterday that you were going to leave? Why haven't you left yet? Hellion Theo wisely chose not to continue this topic. Otherwise, he really didn't know what else Phone Maching could say. I regret it, Phone Maching said happily. Phone Maching said happily, since our Emperor Hellion is crying and begging me not to leave, then I naturally can't bear to leave. Phone Maching said with a smile, which immediately made Hellion Shio's face turn ashen. Chapter 21:34. Phone Maching, if you dare to mention this again. Hellion Theo glared at Phone Maching viciously. As long as you let me stay in the palace, I won't mention it again. Phone Maching quickly raised his hands and said seriously. In the palace of the Northern Pastoral Palace, Phone Maching was lying comfortably on a soft couch, enjoying the massage of a beautiful palace maid. He felt incomparably comfortable. When Helly and Theo finished his work and came over, he saw such a scene. It seems like Tower Master Phone really doesn't treat himself as an outsider. Helly and Theo stared coldly at Phone Watching. When Phone Watching saw Helly and Theo's arrival, he smiled happily. He stood up and looked at Helly and Theo, saying, "I just want to experience how Emperor Hellion lives in the palace. It seems like he's living quite well." Helly and Theo's face darkened when he heard this. He waved his hand and dismissed everyone. Then he walked towards Phone Watching and said, "What are you doing in the palace? You know, don't you?" Phone Watching narrowed his eyes and smiled. He looked at Helly and Theo and said, "Wherever you are, I will be there. After all, you want me to stay, don't you?" Phone Watching smiled again. Helly and Theo immediately shut his mouth. As expected, he couldn't say anything to Phone Watching. Otherwise, he wouldn't know what would come out of his mouth. Helly and Theo thought that Phone Watching would restrain himself when he came to the palace. However, he was obviously wrong. He was inviting a wolf into the house. "Phone Watching, who allowed you to lie on my bed?" After Helly and Theo took a bath and changed his clothes, he went into the inner room and saw Phone Watching lying on the bed in his underwear. His clothes were half open, revealing his muscular chest. "Of course I'm here to serve you in bed." The corners of Helly and Theo's mouth twitched when he saw Phone Watching's devilish smile and the smile in his eyes. What should he do with this scoundrel? Could it be that His Majesty doesn't like me wearing clothes? It's okay. I can take it off myself. As Phone Watching spoke, he reached out to take off his clothes. Helly and Theo's face instantly turned red. He strode toward Phone Watching and reached out to pull Phone Watching down. "Get out of here!" Helly and Shio shouted with a cold face. "Aya, you're still the most interesting when you're drunk." Without saying a word, Phone Watching pulled Helly and Theo into his embrace. His pitch-black eyes stared intently at Helly and Theo. The hand that was holding Helly and Theo did not move at all. "How dare you?" Helly and Theo's face turned red. He always felt that his posture was quite sullen. "You're clearly thinking the same thing as me. Why won't you admit it?" Phone Watching reached out to caress Helly and Theo's face. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Then he smiled and said, "It's okay, I have a lot of time. I can wait slowly." As Phone Watching spoke, he released the hand that was holding Helly and Theo. Helly and Theo straightened his body and looked at Phone Watching silently. He asked why. Why can you let go of so many worries and be so determined to be a moth to a flame without hesitation? Helly and Theo looked deeply at Phone Watching. The expression in his eyes was so serious. "Why?" Phone Watching suddenly smiled and said, "Maybe it's because Jinyu gave me too much encouragement. That's why I came here so bravely." Chapter 2135. Jinyu. Helly and Theo's eyes were tinged with a faint hint of surprise. He didn't expect Phone Watching to suddenly mention Jinyu. "Yes." Phone Watching narrowed his eyes slightly and said, "When I left 5 years ago, I originally planned to never appear again. However, Jingyu's words made it clear to me that if I don't fight with my life on the line, how will I know the outcome?" Phone Watching's words made Helly and Theo's breathing stagnate. He looked into Phone Watching's pitch-black eyes. The seriousness in his eyes was so moving. "Have you thought about the outcome?" Helly and Theo was silent for a moment before he suddenly asked. This was probably the most serious conversation the two of them had ever had. One was leaning against the bed, while the other was standing by the bed. The two of them looked at each other as if this moment would last forever. "What outcome do you want?" Phone Watching didn't answer Helly and Theo's question. Instead, he pursed his lips and asked. Helly and Theo's body stiffened when he heard Phone Watching's question. "It's getting late. You should go back." Helly and Theo turned his back. His silent appearance indicated that he chose to avoid the topic once again. Phone Watching looked at Helly and Theo's appearance and couldn't help but feel angry. He suddenly stood up and reached out to grab Helly and Theo's arm. With a cold expression, he said, "How long are you going to avoid the topic?" What's the point of hiding like this? Aren't you the same? You can only hide like this forever. Hellion Theo pursed his lips and emitted a very cold light. Phone Watching was stunned when he heard this. He looked at Hellion Theo's appearance and suddenly laughed. You finally admitted it, haven't you? Hellion Theo, I'll be very happy if you can continue like this. What? Hellion Shio was stunned. Phone Watching suddenly approached Hellion Shio. Before Hellion Shio could prepare himself, Phone Watching kissed Hellion Shio directly. The familiar touch made Hellion Shio's brain crash. Phone Watching did not give Hellion Shio the slightest chance to react. He directly reached out and grabbed Hellion Shio, driving straight in. The candlelight in the room was burning. Phone Watching panted heavily and slowly let go of his hand. His pitch-black eyes stared intently at Hellion Theo, who was lying under him. Looking at Hellion Theo's red face and unsteady breathing, his eyes were filled with information. Listen. Phone Watching picked up Hellion Theo's hand and placed it on his heart. Hellion Theo could clearly feel the strong heartbeat coming from his palm. The morning sun was a little dazzling. Hellion Shio slowly opened his tightly shut, long and narrow eyes. The feeling of a heavy object pressing down on his waist made Hellion Shio's body stiffen. When he turned his head to look, the first thing he saw was Phone Watching's still sleeping face. Phone Watching, didn't I tell you to get lost? Why are you on my bed again? Hellion Theo was about to go crazy. Oh, beauty, good morning. Phone Watching opened his eyes and looked at Hellion Theo's angry appearance. He calmly smiled and said, I don't know why I'm here. You're probably sleepwalking. Phone Watching said as he moved closer to Hellion Theo and planted a light kiss on Hellion Theo's lips. Your Majesty, it's time for you to go to court. Phone Watching said with a smile as he supported his chin and looked at Hellion Theo's red face. As soon as he said this, Hellion Theo immediately shut up. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.